the brain needs time to restore. We know that if the brain is depleted, there's not much space there for clear thinking or processing. So your bandwidth is essentially really short. Start to keep a list of things that you have done successfully. We forget about all the good things, all the successes we've had, right? We just focus and hone in on that thing that went wrong in our minds without really any way to challenge it. Of course, you're going to end up having a really bad day. And remember that you're helping people, that you can't help people if you're not helping yourself. So please act with some compassion towards yourselves, knowing that this is hard. You're doing the best you can.
Welcome and thank you all for joining us for another Justia webinar. My name is Nina and I'll be the moderator for today. Now, to kick things off, I want to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today, Karen Munoz. Karen Munoz is a seasoned plaintiff's attorney, wellness educator, and the founder of Roaring Grace, a legal wellness consultancy dedicated to helping lawyers thrive. After nearly 2 decades of practicing trauma-informed law, Karen is now pursuing a master's in psychology with a focus on integrating mindfulness, resilience, and emotional intelligence into the legal field. Through her work as a speaker, yoga teacher, and educator, she brings a unique perspective on what it means to be both a strong advocate and a healthy human in the legal world. The webinar presentation that you're about to watch will be approximately 1 hour, and we will be taking questions at the end, time permitting. So if you have questions to submit, you can do so at any time by clicking the Q&A button in your control panel and sending them in there. Now, without further ado, here is Karen to discuss New Lawyers' Strong Start, Managing Stress, and Building Resilience.
Thank you so much, Nina. So congrats if you're watching this. That means you're have made it to be able to navigate one of the most important years of your career, because there's so much growth that happens in this first year, specifically even just the first quarter. And if you're watching this, it's also really important because it's good to know about the challenges that you might start to encounter if you haven't already started to encounter them. And my goal is to help you find ways to move forward in a way that feels right for you, and sharing what I have learned and what I experienced when I was in my first year of practice, and hope that it helps guide you in your first year of practice, which again, there's so much growth that happens, but it can be really difficult and it can feel really isolating, and it can feel like, which we'll talk about, that people just know what they're doing. And you might have experienced a little bit of that or a lot of that in law school, where, lots of students may seem like they have a very strong grasp on the materials, or that they know what exactly they'll be doing after they graduate and pass the bar, right? And so it can be a continuation of those kinds of feelings that maybe feel really uncomfortable, because the reality is when we're starting to do something new in the very beginning, it is uncomfortable. We don't know what we're doing in the way that we see others who maybe have more experience than us. And the whole point of that is it's okay, right? You're beginning. That's the whole point. Like, this is the foundation of how you will become experienced. Like the folks that you might be seeing in court or people that you're working for, they've just been doing it longer, right? But they experienced a lot of that same uncomfortable feelings or discomfort when they first started. And I just think it's become more appropriate, or it's more accepted to talk about it. So this work is really important to me, just really briefly, because I was a young lawyer who struggled a lot in silence. And when we begin to adapt into the environments that we're in, some of you are in private practice, some of you might be in big law, some of you might be in government work, regardless of what environment you have found yourself in your first year of practice, it's very common to adapt to where we are. And what I mean by that is the stressors are there, and human beings are wired to find ways to manage those stressors. And so for me, that involved drinking, which is very common and also very normative in the legal culture. And so I experienced many of the effects of not taking care of myself, of not being aware that this was not necessarily the healthiest way to cope with the stressors that come with the profession. And so I'm really familiar with the ways that stress can take over. And chronic stress, which we'll get into, can become really detrimental to your ability to focus in order to process all of the information that's being thrown your way. So I'm going to share what I've learned, right? So the reality is that the legal profession, it draws a lot of people in who want to help. They want to make a difference. A lot of us started law school with the idea that we were going to go into service-oriented fields or nonprofit work. And everyone who ends up in law school is smart, right? And we jump into what we're doing in one form or another to help other people, to make society a place that we want to live in and a place that others want to live in. So today we're going to talk about the common stressors, why lawyers are particularly vulnerable, specifically early on in the career, and more importantly, how do we begin to face those stressors in a way that's more healthy and more sustainable? So what solutions possibly exist for you so that you're in a state of existence that is able to manage the stressors that are coming your way? Because they are coming your way. The legal profession is inherently full of stressors, and that's just part of the role of being an attorney, right? So let's start with the stressors first. So it starts in the first weeks of law school. Now, you might remember how that experience was for you. You might have blocked it out. You might be somewhere in the middle. But when you start law school, the classes are different than what you might have experienced in undergrad. And what I mean by that is it's full of anxiety going into a space you've never been in before, right? Some college classes, specifically in the beginning, aren't very different than a lot of the classes you might have had your senior year of high school. But law school is different. It's taught differently. You're being trained differently. You may have heard from others who went to law school or who are in it, how hard it can be, or have heard stories about it. And the amount of reading that we have to do, it can feel overwhelming, right? Specifically with people who have ADHD or other neurodivergent states of mind, right? The amount of reading can feel almost insurmountable. So there's also, which makes undergrad different than law school, the curve, right? The dreaded curve. And so it can become or feel competitive with other students. Anxiety starts to build pretty quickly, and it's pretty common. We're learning to juggle a lot in a very short period of time. All of a sudden, you're going to networking events. You are being asked to craft your CV. Where are you thinking about after your first year of going to work in the summer? What types of activities do you want to be involved in at school? So moot court, there's trial advocacy teams, there's competitions that people start to do. Law review is usually something that some people want to be involved with because it might look good on their resume, or the experience might be really beneficial for the practice area they want to go in. You also have to think about what bar prep is going to look like, how you're going to manage paying loans once school is over. Oh, and also you have a normal human life outside of all this that you had before you entered law school. So some of you might have relationships. Some of you might be thinking about getting married, right? So there's a lot going on in that time frame. And the stress does get amplified if you happen to be a person of color, or you're not in the mainstream. And this can be someone who's working while they're going to law school, students with less privilege, right? So there's lots of different stressors if you're looking at this from a lot of different systemic perspectives. And so it's just something to keep in mind. Once you get into the profession, we've got what I call the internal and external stressors. So externally, we are always strapped for time. There's deadlines in so many different places and spaces, court deadlines. We've got deadlines like statutes of limitations. We've got office deadlines, billing, clients who want their cases resolved. The profession can also feel very isolating. There can be bullying. We know that in Illinois in 2024, there was a study that said that 1 in 4 attorneys surveyed of 6,000 people had experienced bullying at some point in the profession. More impacted were women and people of color. The process is built to be adversarial. That is how we come to the truth. So in that adversarial system, we have to take positions or advocate for our clients So that means there's always two different stories, two different positions, right? And then we have an arbitrator, a judge, who determines what narrative will be ultimately successful, right? And clients are expecting good results, right? So when we think about how stressful it can be to be pursuing a result for a client that you ultimately have no final control over, right? Because the process is outcome driven. It's not necessarily the output. Internally, like I said, many people who go to law school have already built in this very high level of discipline. They are exacting and have high standards. They have high expectations of themselves and of others. They're very prone to black and white thinking. And what does that mean? It means that there's no in between, right? It's either A or B. There's only one or two options, right? And this is really set up nicely for the adversarial system, in which there's only two positions usually, a defendant or a plaintiff, and we're looking to see where the truth falls in between, right? So we're very prone to this black and white thinking. Over time, pessimism, negativity bias, and what do I mean by that? Well, it starts in law school, because what are we doing in law school? We are being given a set of facts, and in those facts, we are trained to learn the legal rule, how it was applied to the facts, and then the ultimate result or the conclusion, right? And you analyze. But what are we looking for? Problems, right? We're looking to spot the issue. The issue is usually the problem. And that is what law, the practice is issue spotting. Someone's coming to you, a client is coming to you with a problem that needs to be solved. So over time, the brain becomes, again, as human beings, we adapt to our environment, right? So our brain becomes wired to look for problems, whether that's inside of our practices, or eventually, if it's not managed, it will translate into our outside of our professional lives. We are also competitive against not just one another, but always wanting to do better. And a lot of us, want our clients to be happy. So there's a lot of this people pleasing, right? So internally, some of this might sound familiar, and it can lead to things like imposter syndrome, being really hard on yourself, questioning your competence, especially in the first couple months, couple years, feeling lost, seeking to deliver something that can never occur, which is the standard of perfectionism, which of course leaves you feeling depleted, because the more you try, the further the mountaintop gets away from you, because it doesn't exist, right? There's also a system in place here that contributes to the amount of stressors, and I touched on it a little bit with respect to your place in the system, right? People of color, women, sometimes face different stressors than other folks. So what do we look at? There's a system that you'll be exposed to, or if you haven't already, that's going to challenge your ability to feel rooted and do your job. So this is the legal ecosystem, the micro, the meso, the exo, and the macro. So individually and within the system, these come in layers. So think of it as 4 circles. In the micro circle, it's you and the immediate people in your orbit. So that could be if you work for a partner, your paralegal, your assistants, people, your law clerks, people who are directly in contact with you on a day-to-day basis. The meso is the bigger workplace. So if you work in a law firm or you work for government, it's the bigger system. So this could be other co-workers. It could be clients. Then there's things like the expectations that come with your role. So if you're in a space that's using billable hours, that's part of your meso system. An exo system, you're looking at navigating new systems like the court, opposing counsel. And macro is the bigger system that we're in. So systems of law and societal pressures. So understanding and juggling all these different needs in the practice, it does take time and patience, and sometimes can feel really overwhelming. So we won't spend too much time on this, other than to say that feeling unwell or chronically stressed and anxious can lead to what I've seen, and maybe you've already experienced some of this yourself: exhaustion. So not just a physical tiredness, but a depletion, right? That no matter how much sleep you get, no matter how much sleep you try to catch up on, it seems impossible, right? You're just never caught up. Recovery is really difficult. This leads to impact on the prefrontal cortex ability to think properly, right? The brain needs time to restore. We know that if the brain is depleted, there's not much space there for clear thinking or processing. So your bandwidth is essentially really short. Cognition becomes impaired. So this is the executive functioning of the brain, right? This is your bread and butter. This is what your legal asset is. It's the brain, the ability to solve problems, right? Decision making, your judgment, and even memory can suffer. This all comes along with the lack of energy to really do or try, even on tasks that you normally enjoy or like, can handle easily. When we're tired, we make errors, and it's not because they're intentional, right? But our brains are overloaded and they start to miss things that other minds with more clarity would not miss. And finally, instability starts to show up, right? So it's impacting all these systems. It's impacting cognition. It's impacting how we're showing up for ourselves. It's impacting our behavior, and it's impacting how we feel, our emotions. So incivility is something that we can typically see where someone is just kind of short on all of it. And recognizing that these things might occur or have been occurring isn't about shame. It's not about feeling bad. It's about knowing what can happen in these systems and then being vigilant about your well-being, right? Because we can't change what we're not aware of. So with that said, here's where we are. We recognize common stressors. We've talked about how the brain becomes impacted over time and the reasons why we're more susceptible or more vulnerable. So let's go into what you might experience, common experiences your first year. So going into the office for the first time as an attorney can feel like your first day of school or even kindergarten. You're going to feel out of your league. And again, this is generalization. This is not every single person's experience. Some of you might be going into workplaces or are in workplaces that you might have worked through law school. Some of you may have not worked through law school, and this is it, your first job out of law school, right? So, and there's everything in between. So that there's just generalizations. Some of it might make sense to you and apply, and some of it won't. So generally, we might feel out of our league, right? And we start to embrace the mentality of fake it till you make it. Our ego every day feels a little bruised because we're now in a sea of smarties. We're in a sea of people who seem to have it together and know what they're doing. And that's because, again, they've been doing their job much longer. And that's experience. That's what it looks, sounds, and feels like for people when they've been doing it for a long time. And so this is normal, right? They should know what they're doing. They have the experience now. It doesn't mean they don't experience doubt or they don't feel like they're not doing their best. That's not it at all, but they just do have the experience, which makes everything seem a little easier. You might feel out of sorts when somebody asks you to go to court and they'll talk in short language. They might say, get 35 days to respond to the MTD. And you might say, you may not say it at all, but in your brain, you might be thinking, I don't know what an MTD is, right? And then you'll Google it or something, which MTD is a motion to dismiss. But people talk in short in law, and you may not understand the jargon at first, right? You may not know what a lot of stuff means, and that's okay. Make a list each day. Take some time to try and figure out or do research, because that's what we're trained to do. If we don't know the answer to something, we try and figure it out, right? Eventually, you'll find your groove. It'll all start to come together and make sense. But at first, it's going to be hard, right? But you'll hopefully will learn to prioritize and also learn that it's normal to feel frustrated. And you might want to give up after that first time of not knowing something or the 100th time of not knowing something. But just knowing that there will be many, many times that you're going to feel, I don't know what I'm doing. No, that's really common, right? The first time a partner chastises you or speaks sternly to you, the first time you get a crappy email from an opposing counsel or a client is complaining, is unhappy, first time you lose emotion or a judge is not very kind to you, you're gonna feel it, right? Allow yourself to process that this doesn't feel good and then move on, right? Because you're gonna keep going, you're gonna keep trying, and you are doing your best with what you have in your toolbox today. So the tip here is, remember that this is all normal and it's part of the experience and it's about the process, right? It's about the effort that you're putting in every day. Imagine that you are trying to melt an ice cube, right? It's not going to happen right overnight. You have to, well, it will happen overnight, but if you had an experiment going, you had to melt an ice cube, you have to raise the temperature enough times, right? And at first it might not seem like anything's happening, but eventually that ice cube will melt with the effort of raising that temperature. This is the same thing with any effort you put into something that you're doing new, right? You're not going to see it right away. You're not going to feel it right away necessarily, but it's still effort that is going towards something and eventually it'll click. So remember that. So experience is the best teacher, and there's no magic formula that will make this process feel better, be simpler, go faster, right? Can we just be experienced already? Except for time and living through it. So remember that everyone struggles. And when we're doing something new, it can feel really awkward and uncomfortable because we're not pros at it. Also remember that no one expects you to know all the things, right? Especially in your first year out. So give yourself some grace because other people will, right? As long as you're putting in the effort and being thoughtful and asking questions, doing your due diligence and looking for answers, people understand. This is new, this is big, it takes time. So what can be helpful? Again, looking to find answers, right? So my first thing is, if you don't know something, try to find the answer first yourself. If it's something that really you just cannot find an answer to readily, right? You're going to spend 8 hours doing it. Just ask, right? Also, asking for feedback can be a really great way to understand where you're lacking or what someone else perceives where you can be growing. What can be really helpful too is if you're nervous about asking for help or you're nervous about clarification, just practice in front of the mirror or practice with someone that you care about. And remembering that these skills are not just into the role that you are today, right? They're skills that will be beneficial if you practice in any work setting that you're in. So these are all things that not only worked for me, which is why I talk about them, but also I've mentored dozens of law students and have asked them, what has worked for you? And I've asked them, what hasn't worked for you? So we'll talk about that too. So get good at communicating. And if you don't know something and you've tried to find out, just ask. Ask someone you trust. Be clear about what you're needing or what you're asking for, right? Remember that people, have limited amounts of time, so clarity is really appreciated. Be proactive, plan ahead. Don't wait to be told what to do. So when I say that is, if you're really struggling to find an answer to something, think of potential answers. Don't go to someone empty-handed. Say, I've tried this, I think it might be this. What do you think, right? So offering solutions. And again, you don't have to be the correct solution. Sometimes there isn't a one answer either. So remember that there could be different ways to skin that cat. So don't just offer to help too. Act on whatever you see could use your assistance. So this means presenting information to your bosses in a way that makes their lives easier. So in a way, they're almost like a client. You want to make sure that you are doing everything you can to make their role easier, right? For example, if you go to court, do a quick memo to the file or a quick email saying this is what happened, this is next steps, here's what you need to know, right? Depositions. What was getting in the habit for me really early on was remembering what were the high points of the deposition and then asking for feedback on where maybe I could have done better. Again, nobody likes to get critical feedback, but it's how we learn. When you forward an email about going to court, attach the last order that you maybe filled out, make sure it's saved to the file, the people that need to know what's in it and what needs to be done. Nothing's worse than coming back from court, sticking an order and scanning an order to the file and telling no one what the next steps are, right? And then all of a sudden you have to go back to court and nothing's been done because it wasn't communicated properly. Like that's a sure way to get yourself noticed for the wrong reasons. When you send legal research to your bosses or the person that you're working for, make sure that you can also, if you have time, summarize it in a way as if they were going to explain it to the client, because sometimes that's what ends up happening. The information that we research ends up going to your boss, and then they may have a client who wants to know what's going on, right? And they may take parts of what you've sent them and send it to the client. If you see a new case law coming or that's being litigated, follow it. Keep tabs on it. If you see something in a legal publication that seems interesting or that it relates to something that your office is working on or someone in your office is working on, flag it, summarize it, and send it around. Offer to collaborate with older, more experienced attorneys if there's something that you find interesting that they're working on, or even if you don't. That's how we get to expand our networks of what we're practicing, right? So expand kind of your ability to shift and learn different things if that's something that's available to you in your workplace. Spend some time in court watching other attorneys. This is a really good way to see really good attorneys in action, but also conversely, behavior that is not appropriate for court, right? And you'll start to see if you spend enough time just watching and observing what goes on in court, what tips you might be able to bring to your own practice, and noticing judges' reactions to certain ways people talk. So taking that extra step will always, I would say 99 out of 100 times, find you in a space where you're going to keep growing and people will notice, asking for feedback. And then important is wherever you end up working is to get to know the culture and adapt to that culture, right? So if it's a culture where people wear suits every day, that might be something to consider, right? If it's a culture that's very focused on work-life balance, engage with that, right? Don't be the person working 12 hours, right? Because that's not adapting to that culture. And we want to be able to fit into where we're working. And maybe if you can't, that's an indication that that's not a good work environment for you. Just things to consider, because sometimes we try to make things work and we end up stressed about the fact that it just doesn't feel like a good fit, but we end up staying much longer than we should because we don't know really what to do about it, right? So some more tips. Take responsibility when something doesn't go the way that you envisioned, which happens a lot of the times. Specifically, again, we're not in control of all of the moving parts. When we're litigating cases, things shift and move around a lot. Asking for help, acknowledging that we will make mistakes. That is human. Learning from our mistakes is where we grow, right? So accepting that you're going to mess up, but learn from your mistakes and try not to make the same mistakes twice. I don't necessarily think of them as mistakes. I think of them as learning opportunities, because when something doesn't go according to how we thought it would, that's where our biggest opportunity for growth is, right? Think of when you were a kid and you were riding your bike, right? We learn from trial and error. We learn when we fell, what what not to do the next time. And it's with anything else, right? How you learn to study in law school. When you do an outline and you end up getting your grade back and that outline was not sufficient for what you needed to do, you change tactics, right? So it's the same thing where this is how we learn, is by trial and error, right? When we are succeeding, we're not necessarily taking stock or aware of where we can improve, but you can bet that when we're not succeeding, it's a really good time for reflection and finding ways to improve where we are or where we want to be. So come clean when you mess up. Don't hide it. Don't try and hide it. Come prepared with solutions. When you get a project, if you're billing, ask a partner how many hours is reasonable for this to be completed and work around that, right? If it takes you double that, maybe think about billing what was reasonable, right? And not necessarily the extra time. Respect the staff. Remember that your role is as an attorney in a firm. That does not mean you're better or less than anyone else in the office. Knowing that everyone has their place and different roles to fulfill, right? So a lot of times we would see a hierarchy where there's less attention or less respect paid to certain positions in firms. That is not a very good way to learn and grow, because people have been there longer than you. If you take that mentality of I'm an attorney, you're this and that, that's not going to be beneficial for you in the long run, because again, it comes down to experience. And just because someone's not an attorney in your space, but has been there doing something differently, that you can learn a lot from them. So do your best in your workspace to respect everyone and build rapport with everyone, because again, law is a team effort, right? No matter how many attorneys think that they are doing things on their own, they're not, right? There's always some sort of collective there behind that effort, and we all work better together. Okay. So what solutions potentially exist for a lot of those stressors that we talked about earlier on? So I mentioned this, and it is the foundation for any work, really, when we're talking about how we learn and how we grow, is a sense of awareness. So we can't change what we're not aware of. So this is why I think this work is important, because it's the first step in the brain beginning to process a lot of this information that maybe isn't widely shared in law school, or maybe isn't really talked about, when you first start a job. It's kind of like, here we are, you jump right in, right? So beginning to kind of slow things down and observing yourself. What am I feeling? What is going on? How am I managing a lot of these new things coming at me? And is this something that is sustainable, right? If you're working 14 hours a day or 7 days a week, is that sustainable for you? Because the brain and the body need time to recover. Otherwise, again, you're not going to be in the optimal state of performance if that is something that's continuously occurring. And it's going to cause a lot of chronic unwellness in your practice, in your life. So first step is accepting that there is stress in the profession, that doubt exists individually, anxiety, feeling overwhelmed at times, or not just in the beginning of the practice, but continuously, and it ebbs and it flows. But building awareness is key, because we then can start from that place so it does not consume you, right? So that's the difference. We can focus our attention so it doesn't consume us wholly. And we can counter a lot of the stressors by building up ways to cope in a way that's healthy or healthier, and that maybe sustains us a little bit better. So acknowledging the stress is really important. Acknowledging, being aware, because when we are if we're in denial, right? If you're that person who stayed in a workspace that you knew wasn't right for you, you're just inviting a lot of those stressors to come into your life and continue to build until they become stages of perhaps burnout or worse. So awareness just keeps the door open so that we know when it's time to change. So how do we do this? So for me, what was really important was this concept of the 3 M's, which again, in hindsight, and now they make a lot of sense. But at the time when I was practicing, these words were not in my vocabulary. Mindfulness, I think, didn't really start to come into vogue in the practice of law until the mid 2010s. But it's really, again, just like awareness, it's this foundational piece of how do we build that awareness, right? Because, and then not only how do we build it, but how do we move forward in a way that gives us coping mechanisms? So let's go through these one by one. These are fundamental, in my opinion, of an awareness practice. And I think a more sustainable way of being in the practice. So seed, which is building strong habits, checking in to see what does your sleep look like? Because again, we know that the body and the brain is a supercomputer, right? And so that supercomputer, to be optimal, needs to recharge, needs to reboot. So when we're sleeping, there's so much going on within our physiological state that allows all of our major organs to recharge, to detoxify. This also is happening within our prefrontal cortex and all the different parts of the brain. So how are you nourishing yourself, right? And it starts with sleep. It's really important to build good sleep habits. Now, you may not have had the best sleep habits in undergrad or in law school, and you might be thinking, yeah, well, you don't know my work schedule. You don't know how much work I have to do, how many hours I have to bill. And that's all understandable, right? But again, you're not running a sprint here. This is, if you plan to stay in the profession for your career, the longevity, this is more like a slow marathon. So we know through evidence-based research that sleep is one of the most fundamental needs that we need as humans to thrive. So regardless of what's going on in your work environment, you're not going to be very good for very long if you're not sleeping properly. So take whatever steps you need to take in your life to make that a priority, because again, that investment in yourself is going to pay off dividends. But if you're not prioritizing sleep, then that means that eventually it's going to all come crashing down, because you're not able to your cognition is just not going to be optimal at all. Working on 3 to 4 or 5 hours of sleep every night is not going to cut it eventually. You might get through it, and I did the first couple of years practicing, but again, think you're in your mid to late 20s, a lot of us, when we come out of law school. The body can sustain a lot more when we're younger, but again, we're thinking and talking about this word sustainability. That kind of sleep hygiene is not sustainable. So that's really, really important. Then the next 2 things that are really important is exercise and what are you feeding your brain? Do you take time for exercise? Socially also, are you building time for things that sustain you? So does this mean relationships? It can. Does this mean hobbies? It can. We're talking about what does life look like in the domains of the wellness wheel. So socially, physically, emotionally, spiritually, a lot of us have faith-based lives. Intellectually, what's feeding you? So not only thinking about what those look like in your day-to-day life, but are you aware of the different domains, right? That we that we know help us be more grounded and more whole human beings, right? Because if you're putting all your eggs into the law basket and that's it, that's going to again lead to a lot of misbalance in your life, because we need these other domains to be functioning optimally as well. Now, does that mean that every single day all of these domains are going to be firing at the same level? No. The first couple months, first couple of years of law practice, you should make the practice a priority, because again, you're learning so much new information that you need time to process all of that, right? We can't necessarily be learning to become a pilot on the side and also building the foundation of a law practice. But it's about am I devoting enough time? Do I feel comfortable that I'm putting enough investment in my working out, in my sleep, right? And especially those two things. What am I eating, right? If you're sitting in front of your computer every day, working and ordering out, that's not going to sustain the brain either. We know that the brain needs nutrient-rich foods, dense foods, in order to be at its optimal performance, right? Drinking water is also, these things seem really simple, right? It's like, of course, we know sleep, eat, exercise, have relationships. It's important. It's really, really hard to manage all of these things while you're also beginning your practice. But again, it's this awareness in the back of your mind that these are things that eventually you have to bring some awareness to in order to have that sustainable practice, right? So doing a little bit each day into these different buckets. So I can tell you all I used to think about maybe the first couple years was work. And when it got to be too much, then I would drink, or I would feel really stressed and I would drink. And it's a good way to commiserate with other attorneys, right? But the thing was that we weren't talking about the anxiety, what was going on internally. We would just kind of use it as a way to socialize and cope and make light of what the experience was like in the beginning. But there's a lot of anxiety that's going on there, right? That we don't talk about. It's right underneath the surface. A lot of lawyers experience it. I do. It's really normal if you're a human being, especially if you're a human being today. So there's less stigma about it today, which is great. But it's really important that you also have a space to talk about how you're feeling and how you're doing with someone you trust. And maybe that's a therapist, maybe that's a support group. Most, I would think all states now have a free lap service where lawyers help other lawyers with the different stressors that happen, right? And they usually have therapists or psychologists that can help guide you and put you in the right direction if you're starting to feel that you're navigating off course. So remember that you're shifting back to the foundational things. You're not a machine, so you have to eat well, balanced diet, mindful eating, right? Is this sustaining me? Does this feel good in my body? Movement. So moving yourself any way that gets you off of your chair at work. So one of very, very, very simple thing is every hour, take a 5-minute break, go walk around, go get some water. Physical activity is one of the fastest ways to release stress hormones that starts to build up during the day. Even shrugging your shoulders a couple times throughout your day can be really beneficial to release a lot of that stress that builds, specifically if you've got tech neck on your computer a lot. So exercise also not only is physically good, but it's mentally and emotionally really good because it helps to move around and create these feel-good hormones to elevate mood. So keep in mind too with exercise that it's really important to find something that you like, because if you don't like it, you're not going to stick with it. And we want to find something that is really fun for you to do. Some of us are runners, some of us weightlift, some of us are really into Tai Chi, whatever it is, swimming, gardening. It's about moving your body in a way that you lose track of time, as opposed to looking at the clock and saying, when is this over? It's torture. Drink water. We get cranky. Sometimes we just haven't had enough water, right? Our brain and body just needs water to survive. That's just foundational. The last M is mindset. So what is mindset, right? And how does this all fit in? Well, I touched on this earlier, and it's this shift that we begin to experience in law school, and we're not aware of it. And some of us still might be not necessarily aware of it because it's just the way that the brain adapts to what we've been in, right? So if you've been in law school for 3 years and now are practicing, all seems very normal. Like, of course, you're looking at cases and comparing facts in order to find problem solutions, right? But we're looking at problems. So this allows the brain to focus and fixate on skepticism. We are less apt to take risks because we're mindful of the the different consequences. But we can change this. It requires conscious, intentional effort. But once we're aware of what the brain's patterns are, we can work to kind of begin to break them apart, right? This is important because this mindset is typically geared towards being very fixed. As lawyers, we have generally tend to have very fixed mindsets. And it will see setbacks as failures, when in reality, like I've mentioned, there are opportunities for growth and learning. It also impacts how we respond to stress. So fixed mindsets tend to respond to stress a lot worse than someone who's got more psychological flexibility. Because the psychologically flexible mind sees those setbacks or challenges or failures not as a setback, but as a way to think better, a way to find different solutions, a way to step outside of the box, right? So a more psychologically flexible mindset allows us to sustain a lot more pressure. We do better work. And really it's a big form of mental hygiene, right? Just like sleep is sleep hygiene is really important. It's the most important because without that recharging, none of these other awareness pieces are really going to succeed very long, because the brain is not getting what it needs in order to do this work, because it is a muscle that we're exercising, and specifically if we're looking to change ways that we've been for a long time in our mind. Breaking mental patterns is not easy, right? You need a lot of that energy to catch yourself and counterbalance yourself and choosing a different way of thinking and being in the moment. So what does this look like in practice? Well, we went to law school, right? And one of the things that we get taught is how to cross-examine witnesses. Even if you don't end up doing trial work, it's still a really important piece of ascertaining or questioning someone's story, right? When we know or think that they're not necessarily being forthcoming, right? So we can turn those skills that we've already learned on ourselves, right? So, for example, if a partner gives you back a brief with, I don't know, dozens of rewrites, suggestions, edits, right? For me, I would be thinking, wow, I suck. I don't know how to write. I should go do something else. But wait a minute, how am I going to pay for my school loans? Oh no, my parents are going to be really disappointed. Wow, I'm a failure. That'll happen in the span of maybe 5 seconds, right? That's just normal. Again, we have a very our mindset is built that way, to think worst case scenarios, and we catastrophize, there's rumination. You might be one of the lucky few who just doesn't do that, which is awesome. But most of us will have these, especially when there's critical feedback that's coming your way. We'll have these thoughts of, I failed. I'm just not good enough, right? Stop there and then use that as an opportunity when you start to notice the thoughts of that failing, and ask yourself, where's the evidence for that, right? Did you not go to law school and pass? Did you not graduate? Did you not pass the bar? Did you not get a job? What other successes have you had in your life, right? One mistake or one setback does not determine who you are as a person or your worth, right? And so many times we jump to these conclusions of, even in our personal lives, right? If someone hasn't texted you back, you're thinking, they must be mad at me. I must have done something. What's wrong with them? And you start to create this narrative. And when they finally do text you back, there's some resentment there, right? Because you have created these stories in your own mind. Well, you can create new stories and start to keep a list of things that you have done successfully, right? When we start to challenge our abilities, when self-doubt creeps in, we forget about all the good things, all the successes we've had, right? We just focus and hone in on that thing that went wrong in our minds without really any way to challenge it. Of course, you're going to end up having a really bad day, a really bad week, right? Your self-esteem might be shot for a while. I've known people who have just run with it. And the thing is, it just leads to more anxiety. and you have choices as to how you want to think about something and how you want to feel about something. Sometimes it just feels natural because it's familiar, right? Even if it's wrong. For wrong in terms of the thinking, because it's not based in reality. It's based in our past experiences, maybe how we've learned to think about ourselves, but it's not based in any objective reality, right? That partner who gave you all those suggestions cares, right? They're giving you information so that you can improve upon ultimately a client's work, right? A lot of these are briefs that are going to the court advocating for a client, or maybe it's a letter that we're sending to opposing counsel asking for a demand or a settlement, right? So it's all in the name of helping the client come to a resolution of whatever it is that you're doing, right? Big or small. So how we talk to ourselves really is important because it shapes our reality. And when your mind is trained to challenge those thoughts, you start to build resilience, right? Because we start to shift from catastrophizing and self-blame to more curiosity, to more finding that ability to pause, to kind of stop it in its tracks before you start all of a sudden thinking that you are going to have to move in with your parents, right? There's all these things that start to happen in your brain. If you don't catch it, it's like a runaway train. So when your inner critic starts to show up, replace whatever those thoughts are with something else, right? Because you need to replace it with something else. You can't just go blank, right? So instead of saying or thinking to yourself, oh, wow, I'm failing, you can switch. You can say, this is hard. Yeah, this doesn't feel good, but I'm learning as I go, right? Again, this is growing. So examine your thoughts. We do it for a living, a lot of us, but it's very hard sometimes to see it in ourselves personally. Mindfulness is very much tied into this mindset, because if we're not mindful, then we're not really able to see the differences in how we're thinking. What does it mean to be fixed or rigid versus having more flexibility in our ability to think, right? And again, we know lawyers are very A or B, right? Option one, option two. But there's so much in between, right? There's never just the one or the other. So really, in a nutshell, mindfulness is the ability to be present without judging what's happening in your environment, your brain, your emotions, your thoughts, and not reacting to it, right? Just, okay, I got this brief. It has corrections. That is a fact. Everything else outside of that is something that you're choosing to attach to it, right? So mindfulness helps us to create this distance between our immediate reactions to things so we can respond more in a way that is based in objective reality, right? It allows us to gain insight into these patterns. Like, how do we start to gain insights in these patterns? You start to slow it down, right? Not immediately jump. And it's like diffusing your own thoughts, patterns, and processes. So even 60 seconds of just, and it seems really short, but try it. 60 seconds of just, I'm going to focus just on pointing all the green colors I can see in my space for 60 seconds. I'm going to focus solely on breathing in and out for 60 seconds, right? This allows us to re-engage the brain, kind of get it off that train track where it's barreling towards these very subjective narratives that we might have been telling ourselves for a very long time, right? And go back into the part of the brain that thinks rationally and strategically, which is the prefrontal cortex. And it's important to know that these aren't just temporary quick fixes. This is a practice, right? And what we want to do is shift the brain out of its sympathetic nervous system into its parasympathetic nervous system, which is allowing the body to kind of rest and digest while it's processing the information that it's coming through. Otherwise, we go into very reactive fight or flight nervous system states, which again can be very detrimental over time to our well-being. Especially important in law, where a lot of it can feel like fight or flight. There is a constant sense of putting out fires and being under threat, whether that's a motion for summary judgment coming or, a trial that's looming. There's always something in the horizon that lets us feel a little apprehensive about what we're doing, right? But eventually, if you start to separate and detach from that reactivity, that default, it can help create that space in your brain to kind of process things in a little more logically, right? And follow things to logical conclusion. Like, okay, if this brief, for example, has all these corrections, and then what? So I fix them, okay? And then what? Okay, I learned from what I was corrected, right? As opposed to jumping to these conclusions that are not necessarily based in any real objective truth. Got just a few more minutes, so we'll just cover just a couple of tips for performance under pressure, and then we'll shift to see if there's any questions from anybody. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. But start to notice the thoughts that dominate your inner dialogue, specifically in situations where you feel that you're being given feedback, or you're being made to feel, or you feel yourself that you're just way in over your head. You don't understand what's going on. You got imposter syndrome hard. Start to notice what is happening. What is the mechanics of what's coming into your brain? Does it feel familiar? Has it been with you a long time? Is this how you've normally talked internally to yourself? Is the dialogue fear-based? Is it critical? Is it judgmental, right? So again, it's a piece of awareness is what is going on in my brain, right? The brain is not separate from the rest of our body. The body will tell you too, right? When you're starting to feel apprehensive. A lot of us, our anxiety is somatic. We start to sweat. Our speech becomes more rapid. We're more short with people. Our sometimes can't get words out, right? Because the brain is not processing in a way that's in its logical space. You're just trying to maintain some equilibrium, which can be very hard. So again, questioning the story. We tell stories for a living as attorneys, right? But the stories that we tell ourselves are sometimes often founded in untruths. Sometimes we have learned to live with this thought process of I have to be perfect. This has to be perfect, right? Where does that come from? Get curious about it. Sometimes it's thoughts of there's no room for error. I can't make mistakes. I can't slow down. I have to get this done. You know, there's this rigidity of I have to do these things. I should do these things. Start asking, is this true? Is this helpful? What would I be, or who would I be if I didn't have this thought? That's where we start to really ease into who we are as humans and let go of some of these expectations that we may have set for ourselves, our parents may have set for us, but they're not helpful anymore, right? They're not helping us be optimal in our day-to-day performance. Don't try to positive think your way out of situations either, right? The only way out of fear and frustration is through it. It's not putting a positive spin unnecessarily on anything. It's feeling what you're feeling, right? And that's normalizing feeling frustrated. It's normalizing feeling anxious and overwhelmed. Practicing compassion towards yourself, right? And not trying to sugarcoat everything. Just know it's hard. It can be hard. It will be hard. But you're doing important work. And it's worth doing everything you can to be as healthy as possible as you do that really important work, especially in these times, right? Lastly, you know, when things do start to feel a little crispy, zoom out, right? Remember why you got into law in the first place. Who were you trying to help? What were you trying to do? What was your why? Write it down. Put it down somewhere that's visible to you every day, and maybe you start to accumulate notes that you get from clients, a brief that you get back one day with less corrections, you know, just to track your progress. And also, again, when we know why we're doing something, why do you get up every morning? Why are you doing the work that you're doing? Are you connected to it? Is it aligned with you and what your values are and who you want to be as an attorney, what you want to leave as part of your professional performance? It becomes much easier to navigate a lot of these stressors because we know what we're doing. And studies show that people who are connected to the work that they're doing are just healthier all around than someone who really hates the job that they're in, don't feel connected to the work, don't feel a sense of meaning in what they're doing. So this resilience that we start to build in our practice over time is really connected a lot to, why am I doing this? Why am I putting up with all these stressors, right? And if we have a bigger purpose than just the external motivators that sometimes come with law practice, internally, it makes me feel good. I feel a big relief when I help a client. It's part of who I am, is service to society in some way, shape, or form. We know that you end up being and feeling healthier all around. So when things get hard, which they will, pressure's going to build. Go back to your values, go back to why you're doing what you're doing. And remember that you're helping people. But you can't help people if you're not helping yourself. So please act with some compassion towards yourselves, knowing that this is hard, but you're doing the best you can. So that's me. And was there any questions?
Thank you
Well,
so
yeah.
much, Karen. Yes, we do have a couple of questions that I know are going to come through. If you haven't yet submitted your question, you can do so by going ahead and clicking the Q&A button in your control panel and sending them in there. Like I said, there's a couple here. This first one is from Ruben. They ask, how can we train resilience, quote unquote, a little in order to form a habit? I understand we're not talking about performing it when it's needed. So building resilience in times where it's maybe less high stress, what would you recommend?
So when it's less high stress is finding time to find small moments of what went well in my day today, right? Starting to train the mind to see not just the negative things, but seeing the positive things and keeping a list of those positive things. So what went right today, right? Because so often we focus on that one thing that went wrong when 99 things may have gone right. And that's a really simple way to get yourself out of focusing solely on something that maybe is bothering you or didn't go right. And I say this with a lot of compassion, that this is really simple, but it's really hard to do, because if you try it, we will always focus on default to negative things, right? You may have gone to the dentist for 10 years and never gotten a cavity, and you just dismiss that, right? But the first time that they tell you you need something done on your teeth, it's like, well, what do you mean? Like, I've never had a cavity, it's so appreciating when things are going right can do a lot to balance that out, to say, well, gosh, for 10 years I didn't have anything going on, right? That's great. We don't appreciate the things that we have, right? So finding some times in our lives to be grateful for every day goes a long way too, to building that arsenal of, there doesn't need to be high stress in order to appreciate life for what it has given you.
Thank you for sharing that, Karen. I think we have time for one more question,
Okay.
so we'll just go ahead and take this one. This person asks, what signs do you feel indicate that normal stress might be turning to burnout, especially for new lawyers who maybe aren't as seasoned at recognizing these things?
So the top 3 I would say is, when you wake up every morning, you dread going to wherever you're going, whether that's you're working from home to your space where you're working. I know people who were working from home during the pandemic, and they can no longer, they have the door closed to the office where they used to spend that time in when they were in a role that wasn't for them. Um, you will start to feel like your body will not feel energized to go anywhere and do the work. You will feel low energy. You might feel feelings of resentment and anger. You'll definitely stop really, you'll know when you stop caring. So that means, I don't want to talk to this client. I don't want to go to court. And again, it's very normal to feel that every once in a while. You just don't want to deal with it. That's totally normal. But when that becomes the norm, where I'm getting into issues, I'm very short with people, I don't have any patience, I know I'm not giving all of that I can be doing, because I just don't care. And it's not because you just don't care because you want to not just care. It's just, you hit a point where it becomes really hard to become engaged in anything that you're doing. So the biggest signs really is the dreading, the irritation, anger, resentment, and the stopping of caring, right? Things that maybe you used to do something to you physiologically or mentally don't anymore, right? You're just kind of like, you're just floating through the motions. But there's a lot of warning signs before that about starting to feel crispy. And that's when that's why the vigilance is really important, right? Because most people don't feel or do anything really until there's a crisis, right? We end up in crisis, whatever that looks like. Sometimes it's DUIs for people. Sometimes it's just a sense of, I don't feel I'm making a difference. And it can be smaller too, right? Just every day kind of feeling really less and less connected to the work that you're doing. These are all messages that you're receiving, but you're not necessarily listening to.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for adding that color of what to maybe look out for. And thank you for taking the time to answer our audience questions and just sharing your insights today on mindfulness and law and why those two being intertwined is so important for a healthy legal practice. We really appreciate it. We want to thank you all so much for joining us for another Justia webinar. As I mentioned, upgrading to Justia Connect Pro does give you that access to CLE credit opportunities live and on demand, regardless of your jurisdiction. Pro members also enjoy an enhanced directory profile, the AI-powered Justia chat to help you capture more leads, and exclusive discounts on Justia marketing solutions. You can take advantage of these benefits and upgrade today, or just check it out at pro.justia.com. Thank you all so much for joining, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did enjoy it, please click the like button and subscribe to our channel for more videos on law practice and legal marketing. See you in our next video.